All right, thanks everybody for being here. I'd like to first start off by thanking Amy for all of her support. You know, I mentioned it a couple weeks ago when we did the trade. The dialogue back and forth between herself, me, and Mike has been outstanding as we prepare to build this football team. We've talked about players, we've talked about scenarios, just a lot of things, and it's all been very, very positive. Would like to thank Blake Bedingfield, our college director, and his scouting staff, college scouts, for the work that they have put in over the last 8-9 months, and then kind of buying into the philosophically what my style of scouting is. And then Brian Gardner and the pro staff for all the work that they've done on the team needs books and predictors and stuff, and preparations, seeing how other teams might attack the draft. And then lastly, but certainly not least, a special thank you to C.O. Mercado, the late C.O. Mercado, and his family. Really a monumental figure in scouting and in personnel and team building. I know he has meant a ton to this franchise, but more importantly, he's meant a ton to the game of NFL football and scouting in particular. Mike, I don't know if you've got some.
Yeah, no, I was going to same thing with just the thank yous to my coaching staff who have spent a lot of time and effort in this process with the draft. There's been a lot of travel. There's been a lot of days and nights away from their families, and as the scouts as well. But appreciate they've got a lot on their plate, especially this first year, putting a book together and getting ready for the draft and getting ready for these phases with these players. I appreciate their efforts, and just the process working with John has been very good. The dialogue has been very easy, and I've enjoyed the time and learned some things that we both have through this whole process.
Question? John, there's been some talk about you guys trading back up, moving back into the top 10 if you got the right player, the right deal, that sort of thing. In this draft, is there a line of separation between the first 8 or 10 players maybe than where you are at 15, or does this draft go fairly deep to where you guys are?
I mean, I think the draft's fairly deep. I think we're going to be able to get a good player in the first round, but not only the second and third round as well. That's kind of what played into our decision to move out of the first overall pick. I think we'll take every scenario and every opportunity on a case-by-case basis. How much is that going to cost the currency we were able to accumulate with the trade to move back up? Where would that be? I think you just have to evaluate all that on an individual basis, and then do what you think's best.
Is there a certain amount of the currency that you've got that you feel like you don't want to part with?
All of it. All of it.
Right.
No, again, there's a cost of doing business, and again, we would like to maximize the value on any move that we make. Whether it's move up or move back in any of the rounds.
Does the amount of picks that you have make you more liable, do you think, to maybe take a chance on a guy who's talented but possibly has some injury risks in the second, third round, something along those lines?
I mean, again, I think you just have to take it on a case-by-case basis. We weigh in the on-the-field evaluation, the time that we've spent with the players in an interview setting, our psychological testing, the medical information. You have to weigh everything, every little thing that's attributed to that player goes into the decision to pick the player or not.
How hard is it to evaluate?
When you got hired, the board was already a work in progress, obviously. Your philosophy, without going into specifics, did it create some big changes in the board, or is it still pretty consistent with what you inherited, would you say?
I mean, it moved a little bit. I mean, we're a role-specific scouting team. You know, there's defined roles for everybody on this football player, and there's values placed on those players. So we took the information that all the scouts had accumulated, their evaluations, and then kind of put it into the terminology or the numeric system that I'm more familiar with.
Can you, in sort of maybe broad terms, if there's a difference in your mind between Tunsil, Stanley, the tackles, and the other tackles, I guess, how much of a difference are those guys head and shoulders above everybody else? Or?
Well, they're each their own individual players. I mean, they all have, every player has their strengths and weaknesses. I would say there's that whole offensive line group it's a pretty strong group. You know, there's a lot of good football players, you know, at outside of tackle and inside at the guard and center position. So, you know, I've said it before too, it's not just about one player on the offensive line. It's about how well those 5 guys up there work together. That's, to me, the most important thing, is how well those 5 guys can play the game together.
Are those the only 2 guys that are automatic left tackles, I wonder, Stanley and Tunsil?
And I think those guys can play a couple positions. I think they could play left or right tackle.
How, I guess, do the strengths of this draft match up with maybe the needs of this football team?
I think fairly well. Again, that's one of the you know, kind of factors that played into our decision to move out of the first pick was, you know, it was a pretty deep draft at various positions, and we think there's going to be a lot of good football players in the second and third round. That, you know, there's 3 of those guys that we can get now if we keep all those picks that we weren't going to, you know, be privy to had we stayed at 1. So I think it is a deep draft.
Well, you touched on it earlier about medical, you know, weighing that in. How tough is it to evaluate guys like Jalen Smith and Miles Jack, who would be at or near the top of the draft if they didn't have injury issues?
Yeah, again, that's for people, you know, way smarter than me with way more degree, you know, annotations behind their name than me. I mean, we have to put our trust in the doctors and what they say, the predictors that they're going to make medically. Does it impact the draft? You know, potentially, according to how your doctor graded the player.
Mike, not your first draft as a head coach. You typically vocal in the draft room saying, "Oh, by the way, I really like this guy," or do you tend to stay with GM's way?
No, I'll have conversation with John throughout the day. As we every morning we have a conversation. We go through all the what ifs, every option available to us. Some days it's very similar. Some we have a complete changeover of what we think, but it's really been, the dialogue has been very good for, I think, the both of us, our input, because we may not see a guy the same way, and we'll talk through it and we'll watch him on tape. So yeah, on draft day, come Thursday, we'll be talking each pick as it comes up.
And Mike, you've had guys on your teams in the past who have been versatile, can do a number of things. You know, guys like Braxton Miller, Keenan Reynolds, who you've seen during this process. Guys like that intrigue you, and how valuable are they in a draft like this?
I think they have more value than maybe somebody else, some of these other teams, some of these other coordinators, head coaches. You know, they'll probably be talked about a little more than most, because of their ability to do multiple things. That you know, I've had that in the past, and we'll talk more about them.
Mike, how has this experience, this draft preparation, compared to your previous experiences as a head coach getting ready for the draft?
Very similar. I probably have spent more time with John than I have in previous times. Just, you know, never had the number 1 pick prior, never went through a trade such as we have. So I've probably had more dialogue here. And I think, and I would say this, probably our coaches have been out and traveled more and been more hands-on than my last 2 experiences. So it's been good. We've gotten a lot of good information from the staff as well as the scouts.
Yeah, a lot. You know, it's good. I mean, we've evaluated all the guys in the draft, but you know, those guys specifically that you mentioned there. I mean, we visited with all of those guys on a one-on-one level, and you know, we're able to kind of finalize or crystallize the evaluation on the player.
John, in terms of wide receivers, can you talk about the depth of that position in the draft? And I guess specifically, are there a lot of number 1s out there in your mind?
I think it is it's a good position group. I think there's good football players at that position group. There's guys that can play on the outside. There's guys that can play on the inside. There's guys that can do a little bit of both. And I think if you were to poll 32, you know, all 32 teams, the definition of a number 1 receiver, it might be different for, you know, 28 of those teams. I think there's guys that can come in and have an impact to an offense, at the receiver position.